The moment I discovered Jacob had taken our father's inheritance without a word, a sharp coldness settled in my chest. I stood there in the dim light of Dad's study, the heavy oak desk between us, as he smirked and shrugged off my protests. "It's mine now, Daniel. You weren't around when it mattered," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Those words shattered something I hadn't known was so fragile, the trust between brothers. "My name is Daniel, and I never thought the man I grew up with, the one I called brother, could betray me so completely. We had shared everything as kids, scraped knees, late-night talks, secrets whispered under the stars. But the inheritance wasn't just money or property. It was the last piece of Dad's legacy, a bond meant to keep us connected even after he was gone. Now that bond was severed by Jacob's greed. I remember the day Dad passed away like it was yesterday, the silence in the hospital room, the weight of the final goodbye pressing down on us all. I was ready to honor his wishes, to stand united with Jacob as we sorted through the estate. But Jacob had other plans, and I was left out in the cold, blindsided by his ruthless move. That afternoon, as I confronted him, the anger bubbling beneath my skin was matched only by the disbelief. "You can't just take it all," I said, voice shaking but firm. "Dad wanted us to share this, to keep the family together." Jacob laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed in the room. "Dad wanted a winner, Daniel, not someone who's always playing second fiddle." In that moment I realized the fight wasn't just for money, it was for respect, for recognition, for the brother I thought I knew. But Jacob's eyes told a different story, one of betrayal and selfishness. He held the papers in his hand, the legal documents that gave him control, and he waved them like a trophy. The study felt suffocating, the walls closing in as I tried to process the reality of the situation. Years of sibling camaraderie crumbled in seconds, replaced by a cold, sharp divide. I wanted to scream, to plead, to make him see the damage he was causing, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I stood there, numb, as he turned his back and walked away, leaving me with nothing but the weight of his deceit. That night I sat alone in Dad's empty house, the echoes of our childhood laughter replaced by silence. I traced my fingers over the worn family photo on the mantelpiece, a snapshot of better times, before greed poisoned our bond. The image blurred as tears filled my eyes, but beneath the hurt, a fire ignited. I wasn't going to let Jacob's betrayal define me or our family's legacy. I began to piece together what my next steps would be, even though the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with obstacles. Jacob had the legal upper hand for now, but I knew there was more to the story, more than just the signed papers he flaunted. Dad's intentions had been clear, and I was determined to uncover any evidence that would prove the inheritance was never meant to be a solo prize. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself revisiting every conversation, every memory with Dad and Jacob, searching for clues. I scoured through old letters, financial records, and even Dad's personal journals, hoping to find something that would tip the scales back toward fairness. Each discovery was a small victory, a piece of the puzzle that Jacob thought he could erase. But the hardest battle wasn't in the documents or the law, it was in facing the man who had become a stranger. Jacob, once my brother, now my adversary, seemed to relish in his triumph. Our family gatherings became battlegrounds of silent tension, his smirks and dismissive glances cutting deeper than words ever could. The support I expected from others was fractured, with some choosing to side with Jacob's bravado rather than my plea for justice. I found myself retreating, not just physically but emotionally, as the betrayal gnawed at my sense of self. How could the brother who once protected me now stand as my greatest obstacle? The question haunted my nights, twisting like a knife in my gut. Yet, amidst the pain, I refused to succumb to bitterness. Instead, I channeled my hurt into quiet resolve. I began to build my own foundation, focusing on what I could control. I took on extra work, invested time in learning about legal processes, and sought advice from trusted friends who believed in my cause. The journey was isolating, but it was also awakening. I realized that to reclaim what was rightfully mine, I needed more than anger. I needed strategy and patience. The more I learned, the more I understood how Jacob had manipulated the situation. He had exploited Dad's absence and my initial reluctance to confront him, using every loophole to cement his control. But I was no longer the naive brother who accepted his word as gospel. I was becoming a man who would fight back with every tool at his disposal. One afternoon, while sifting through Dad's old files, I uncovered a letter addressed to both Jacob and me. The handwriting was unmistakably Dad's, a testament that the inheritance was meant to be shared equally. My heart pounded as I read his words, filled with hope and trust that we would honor his wishes together. This letter was more than a piece of paper. It was the key to restoring what Jacob had stolen. Armed with this newfound evidence, I felt a surge of confidence. I wasn't powerless anymore. I could challenge Jacob not just emotionally but legally. The road ahead would be long and painful, but I was ready to face it head on. The betrayal had broken the bond between us, but it hadn't broken me. That evening I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The world outside moved on, unaware of the silent war unfolding within my family. I clenched the letter in my hand, a symbol of hope and determination. Jacob's laughter from that day still echoed in my mind, but now it fueled my resolve. I knew this was only the beginning. The fight for justice, for my father's true legacy, was just starting to unfold. And I was ready to reclaim not only what was rightfully mine, but also the dignity that Jacob had tried to steal. The betrayal had carved a deep wound, but it had also forged a new purpose within me. As the night deepened, I whispered into the darkness, "I won't let you win, Jacob." The words felt heavy but true. The battle lines were drawn, and I was no longer the brother who stood silently in the shadows. I was ready to step into the light and fight for what was right, for family, for honor, and for the future we were meant to share. The days after discovering Dad's letter blurred into a relentless rhythm of quiet determination. I wasn't just a brother wronged anymore. I was a man shaping a plan that stretched far beyond the immediate hurt. Jacob had taken everything, but I was about to show him that betrayal wasn't the end of my story, it was the spark that ignited my transformation. I began with the small things. Mornings spent poring over legal books and estate records, evenings on the phone with lawyers and financial advisors who could help me understand the intricacies of inheritance law. Every conversation chipped away at my ignorance, building a foundation of knowledge I'd lacked before. I couldn't afford mistakes. Jacob had the advantage now, but I was determined to level the playing field. The hardest part was learning to be patient. The anger that had flared when I first confronted Jacob simmered down, replaced by a cold focus. I wasn't interested in shouting matches or empty threats anymore. I needed evidence, strategy, and allies. I had to become the kind of man who didn't just react but planned, who didn't just feel but acted. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects that demanded every ounce of my attention, building not only financial stability but also a reputation that couldn't be ignored. I wanted to prove to Jacob and perhaps to myself that I was more than just the man he dismissed as weak or absent. I was becoming someone who could stand tall, someone who could reclaim what was rightfully mine. At night I'd sit at my desk, sifting through every scrap of information I could find about Dad's estate, cross-referencing dates and details, searching for inconsistencies in Jacob's claims. Slowly, a pattern emerged. There were financial moves Jacob had made in Dad's name, transfers and contracts executed without my knowledge or consent. It was clear he had been manipulating more than just the inheritance papers. I documented everything meticulously, creating folders and spreadsheets, a silent arsenal growing in my hands. The more I uncovered, the more certain I became that Jacob's control was built on deception, not rightful ownership. I wasn't just fighting for what Dad had left us, I was fighting to expose a lie. But the transformation wasn't only practical. It was personal. I started waking up earlier, exercising, sharpening my mind and body. The man who had stood stunned and defeated was evolving into someone confident and unyielding. I even began attending local legal seminars, soaking in knowledge and connecting with experts who could later support my case. Each step was deliberate, a brick in the fortress I was building around my future. Friends and family noticed the change. Some offered support quietly, nodding when I spoke about the battle ahead. Others kept their distance, wary of the storm brewing between Jacob and me. It was a lonely path, but I welcomed the solitude. It gave me space to focus, to plan without distraction. Jacob, of course, remained oblivious to the storm gathering beneath his feet. His arrogance was his shield. He mocked my efforts when we crossed paths, dismissing me as a desperate man clinging to hope. "You're chasing ghosts, Daniel," he sneered once, the venom in his voice clear. But I met his gaze without flinching, the fire inside me burning brighter with every insult. I refused to be the man he thought I was. I wasn't chasing ghosts. I was uncovering truths, and I was getting closer to proving them. Months passed, and my hard work began to bear fruit. I secured a lawyer with experience in contested estates, someone who believed in my cause and was ready to fight alongside me. Together, we reviewed the evidence. I'd gathered: the letter from Dad, the suspicious financial transactions, the patterns of deceit Jacob had woven. It was enough to move forward, enough to challenge the status quo. Still, I knew the battle wouldn't be quick or easy. Jacob had resources, connections, and the kind of ruthless cunning that made him dangerous. But I had something he didn't: the truth. And I had the strength to see this through, no matter how long it took. I also began to rebuild my own life beyond the conflict. I reconnected with old friends, started new routines, and found solace in small victories outside the courtroom. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about reclaiming my identity. Each step away from Jacob's shadow was a step toward freedom. One evening, as I closed my laptop after another long day of research, I paused to reflect on how far I'd come. The boy who had been shattered by betrayal was now a man preparing for war, steady and unyielding. I wasn't just fighting for what Dad had left behind. I was fighting for the future I deserved. The quiet determination that had taken root within me was unshakable. I knew the next phase of this journey would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine, but I was ready. For the first time since Dad's death, I felt in control, a force to be reckoned with. Jacob's laughter and smirks no longer haunted my thoughts. Instead, I pictured the moment when the truth would surface, when the facade he'd built would crumble. That vision fueled my every move, every sleepless night spent preparing for what was to come. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a strategist, a fighter, and soon I would be the one rewriting the story. The inheritance wasn't just a prize, it was a battlefield, and I intended to win. As I shut off the lights and headed to bed, the weight of the journey ahead settled around me like a cloak, but beneath it a quiet hope glimmered. The years of planning and perseverance were shaping me into someone unrecognizable, not to others but to myself. Stronger, wiser, ready. And when the time came to confront Jacob again, I would be not the brother he thought he could break, but the man he never saw coming. The day I confronted Jacob with the proof felt like standing at the edge of a storm, electric, tense, and inevitable. Years of careful planning, sleepless nights, and quiet battles had led to this moment. I wasn't the same man who had stood helpless in Dad's study. I was ready to reclaim what was mine, armed with evidence and unshakable resolve. Jacob's office smelled of expensive leather and arrogance, a stark contrast to the simmering tension that filled the room. He looked up from his desk, surprise flickering briefly before a smirk spread across his face. "So, you finally grew a spine," he said, voice dripping with disdain. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I placed the thick folder on the polished surface between us, the weight of its contents heavier than any words could be. "Read it," I said simply. "Everything you've been hiding, every transaction, every forged document, it's all here. The letter from Dad, the financial records, the proof that this inheritance was never meant to be yours alone." Jacob laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the walls. "You think these papers change anything? You're grasping at straws, Daniel. You don't have what it takes to take me down." But this time, I was ready for his bravado. I slid the letter from Dad across the desk, the ink still vivid, Dad's handwriting unmistakable. "This isn't grasping at straws. This is our father's voice, his last wish. You stole from me, from us, and now I have the power to fix it." His eyes narrowed, the mask of confidence slipping for a moment. "You won't get away with this. I have lawyers, connections. You're out of your depth." I met his gaze steadily. "Maybe, but I have truth on my side, and that's something you can't buy or fake. The confrontation was not just about words, it was a battle of wills. Jacob tried to deflect, to intimidate, but beneath it all I sensed cracks in his armor. He was rattled, caught off guard by the strength I'd amassed. The years he thought I'd wasted were the foundation of my comeback. After what felt like hours, he slammed his fist on the desk. A shout caught in his throat. "Fine," he spat. "If you want to fight, you'll get one. But don't think this ends here." I nodded, the calm before the storm. "It doesn't. It's just beginning." The legal battle that followed was grueling. Courtrooms became the arena where our fractured family history was laid bare for all to see. Jacob's lawyers fought fiercely, twisting facts and attacking my character, trying to paint me as the desperate sibling grasping for a handout. But I stood firm, armed with the evidence we'd uncovered and the unwavering truth of Dad's wishes. The courtroom was cold and unforgiving, but each witness I called, each document I presented, chipped away at Jacob's facade. His confident smirks faded as the weight of proof mounted against him. I watched as the room shifted, the scales tipping in my favor with every undeniable fact laid out before the judge. One day, during a critical cross-examination, Jacob faltered. His voice wavered, his carefully rehearsed story unraveling under the pressure. I saw the flicker of fear in his eyes, the same fear I'd felt when I first realized the depth of his betrayal. It was vindication, a moment of quiet triumph that filled me with a cold satisfaction. Jacob's anger was palpable, his defenses breaking down as the truth took hold. The courtroom was silent but for the steady voice of my lawyer and the judge's measured questions. Outside, whispers began to spread. The brother who had been cast aside was now the one reclaiming his rightful place. But the victory wasn't just legal, it was personal. I felt a shift inside me, a reclaiming of dignity and respect that Jacob had tried to steal. The fight had been brutal, but it had revealed who I truly was, not a victim but a man capable of standing up and demanding justice. As the hearing drew to a close, I caught Jacob's eye across the room. His look was a mixture of anger, regret, and something like disbelief. Our shared history hung between us, a fragile thread stretched taut by years of betrayal, and now, confrontation. This wasn't the end of our battle, but it was a turning point. I had taken back more than just papers and property. I had taken back my voice, my pride, and the possibility of a future where I wasn't defined by his treachery. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt lighter, though the road ahead was still uncertain. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. I was no longer the brother in the shadows. I was the one rewriting the story, one undeniable truth at a time. The courtroom doors closed behind me like the final seal on a chapter long overdue. Jacob's world, once so certain and unshakable, had begun to crumble in the harsh light of truth. I watched from the sidelines as his confident facade cracked, revealing a man isolated by his own choices. The aftermath of our confrontation was a quiet reckoning, one that rippled through the fractured family and beyond. Jacob retreated into himself, his usual bravado replaced by a brooding silence that spoke volumes. The people who once admired or feared him now looked away, sensing the shift beneath the surface. I wasn't the enemy anymore. I was the brother fighting to restore what had been broken. But even in victory, the wounds ran deep. I spent hours reflecting on the cost of this battle, not just the legal fees or the strain on relationships, but the emotional toll that betrayal exacts. Family dinners were tentative, conversations laced with tension and unspoken regrets. Some relatives sided with Jacob out of loyalty or fear, others quietly supported me, hoping for a restoration of balance. In the spaces between, I sought to mend what could be healed, even as the scars remained visible. My focus turned to rebuilding trust and fairness, not just reclaiming assets. I reached out to those who had been caught in the crossfire, attempting to bridge the gaps with patience and humility. It wasn't easy. The past couldn't be erased, but perhaps with time it could be understood. Jacob's isolation was palpable. I saw him less and less at family gatherings, his bitterness evident in the sharp glances he cast my way. Yet, despite his anger, I sensed a flicker of regret beneath the surface, a quiet acknowledgment of the consequences his choices had wrought. I didn't seek his forgiveness, nor did I expect it. My aim was justice, not reconciliation, but the fissures in his world served as a reminder of how fragile pride can be. In the weeks following the court's ruling, I worked with my lawyer to formalize the division of assets and ensure that Dad's wishes were honored fully. The legal victory was a step toward restoring fairness, but it was also a symbol of resilience, a testament to what could be achieved when truth and perseverance aligned. Outside the courtroom battles, I rebuilt my life with a newfound clarity. I invested time in personal growth, nurturing relationships that had suffered and forging new ones grounded in honesty and respect. The weight of betrayal slowly lifted, replaced by a steady sense of purpose. One evening, as I sat alone in the quiet of my home, I thought about what this journey had taught me. Betrayal had been a harsh teacher, but it had also revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed. It showed me the importance of standing firm, of fighting not out of anger but out of a commitment to what is right. I realized that justice wasn't merely about winning a battle. It was about restoring dignity to myself, to my family, and to the legacy Dad had entrusted to us. It was about healing wounds, however slowly, and building something stronger from the broken pieces. In the months that followed, the family began to shift again. Conversations became less guarded, and while the past could not be undone, there was a tentative movement toward understanding. I saw glimpses of hope in shared smiles, in moments of genuine connection that suggested the possibility of mending what had been torn apart. Jacob and I remained distant, our relationship irreparably changed, but the bitterness that had once consumed me had mellowed into acceptance. I no longer carried the weight of his betrayal as a burden, but as a lesson, a reminder of the boundaries between justice and revenge. As I navigated this new chapter, I focused on the future rather than the past. I dedicated myself to causes that mattered, to building a life defined not by conflict but by purpose. The inheritance was more than property or money. It was an opportunity to create something meaningful, to honor Dad's memory in ways that transcended material wealth. The battle had left scars, but it had also forged resilience. I was no longer the brother overshadowed by deceit, but a man who had reclaimed his place with integrity and strength. The courtroom victories were behind me, but the true work of healing and growth had only just begun. And in that quiet space, amid the echoes of what had been lost and found, I discovered a deeper kind of peace, one born not from conquest, but from the courage to face betrayal and emerge whole. The final papers were signed in a quiet office, far removed from the tension and turmoil that had marked the past months. As I watched the ink dry on the documents, a strange calm settled over me, a calm born not of victory but of resolution. I had reclaimed the inheritance, not just on paper, but in a way that restored my sense of self and dignity. The weight that had pressed on my chest for so long finally lifted, replaced by something lighter, freer. Walking out of that building, the air felt different, clearer, as if the years of conflict had cleansed the space around me. I wasn't just a man who had won a legal battle. I was someone who had survived betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser. The road ahead was open, filled with possibilities I was only beginning to imagine. I took the inheritance and transformed it into something that mattered beyond my own needs. A portion was set aside in a trust, dedicated to helping women who, like me, had faced hardship and needed a hand up. It was my way of turning pain into purpose, of ensuring that what had been stolen wouldn't just be reclaimed but multiplied in impact. This act of giving felt like a quiet revenge, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that builds and heals. Alone, I watched as the ripples of the court battles settled into distant memories. Jacob's anger faded into silence, his bitterness no longer a shadow over my life. I didn't seek to punish him. I simply stepped away, choosing freedom over grudges. The family fractures remained, but I no longer carried their weight. Instead, I carried hope. Daily, I built a new life, one grounded in independence and integrity. Mornings were for reflection and planning, afternoons for work and growth, evenings for connection with those who truly mattered. Each day was a step away from the past and toward a future I could shape on my own terms. An unexpected email arrived one morning, a message from a young woman who had benefited from the trust I'd established. Her words were simple but profound. Gratitude for the opportunity to pursue her dreams, a testament to the ripple effect of what I'd started. Reading her story, I felt a warmth that no courtroom victory could match, a reminder that true revenge wasn't about their suffering but my freedom to create something meaningful. The scars of betrayal remained, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they became markers of resilience, reminders that even in the darkest moments, it's possible to find light. I boxed up remnants of the past letters, photographs, memories, and released them into a river, watching them float away with the current. It was a symbolic act, a farewell to pain and a welcome to peace. Walking forward, I embraced the lessons learned. Trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, not by forcing others to change, but by changing myself. I had reclaimed my inheritance, yes, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my story. The future stretched before me, unwritten and full of promise. And as I stepped into it, I carried with me the quiet strength of a man who had been betrayed but refused to be broken. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.